A long overdue hello, TTRPGers, and those who love Fabula Ultima. This is going to be a great video today because after reflecting back on the past videos where I've showed you how to make awesome player characters and then shown GMs how to build NPCs from scratch, whether they're monsters, undead, any type of elemental, doesn't matter. Today is the day where we put them together and we start talking about combat. Can't wait to check it out. Now, before I get started, and I'm just going to tell you all up front, this is going to be a little bit of a longer start of my videos than normal. I do want to reach out and say how much I appreciate everyone who continues to come back to my channel, views my videos, responds to my videos in the descriptions. We talk about Fabula Ultima. I hear experiences from people, and that's helped bridge into my Discord, which has grown pretty decently as well. And I'm been very impressed with the amount of people that have been on here asking for questions, not just to me, but being part of an awesome community. We have learned to appreciate the game together, and we continue to talk about it in my Fabula Vault streams and through all other different type of avenues. But at the same time, this is a weird video for me to record because it's been, I think, just over 2 months since I did my last video where I was super excited and boasting about how close I was to 500 subscribers. And I hit it, and then I hit a brick wall. I kind of took a mental and emotional decline, nothing of significance or anything to the point where, anyone should be worried or anything like that. But life gave me some jabs, and I've kind of had to adapt to it, mostly relative to work. And it just kind of took the energy out of me to be able to put these type of videos out. And it sucks because this is one of the few things I really started to enjoy doing. And as I saw the community grow and people showing appreciation for these videos, I was heartfelt and wanted to contribute, but I just couldn't get to that top point where I wanted to bring quality back to my videos that was worth watching. I tried recording videos multiple times, and I don't know if it was imposter syndrome or I just felt like I was not valued in my brain at the time. But either way, this is me ranting, but I just wanted to say thank you all who have continued to communicate to me in my channel throughout even the 2 months I hadn't even really posted anything. I've seen my subscribers grow up to 600 in a blink of an eye from me not even really being very communicative, and that's my fault. And that's an apology to all of you because I want people to find out about this game. I want people to tout this game, and I want people to see how easy it is to learn and find a community that really wants to play it, that breaks out of the realm of the traditional TTRPGs. And I usually don't even say them by name, but the D&Ds and the Pathfinders of the world. Pathfinder's fine. I think D&D is a complete dumpster fire right now, and anyone who puts their time into that game with no other open mind, I really implore you to try something new like Fabula Ultima. And even if you don't like Fabula Ultima, there's so many other games. Start finding fun with your groups. Start finding people to make groups. And find things that make you realize how fun things can be when you start to open up and just be ready to try something new. And that was a reminder to me of why it's important I make these videos, because I want people to experience that fun. So that being said, once again, thank you to everyone. Let's continue on to learn Fabula Ultima, have fun with Fabula Ultima, and let's start finding out about how combat works. Now, I aim this video to be as intuitive as possible for people new or just wanting to learn a little bit more in Fabula Ultima, but I also want to point out that I have been recently working with another YouTube group called Shield's Rest, who do awesome videos about other TTRPGs, and they have also jumped into Fabula Ultima, and they had reached out to me to ask if I wanted to collaborate. So I joined the fray. I am playing in the series called From 5 to 50, where as I'm playing a type of character that started at level 5, we have a combat scene, and then the next video we went to level 10, and then 20, and we're progressing within 10 variables to level 50. So you get to see the range of how our characters grow, what they can do, and the wild things we come up with. So if you want to see a lot of how combat works in there, you can see it in those videos at Shield's Rest YouTube video. I'll also have the link directly to them. They've been awesome people to work with, and they've been fantastically friendly to me, despite me not originally being part of their cumulative group. So once again, check the videos out, and we'll start learning the nuts and bolts right now. Now, before we just jump into combat, it's worth noting that combat itself in Fabula Ultima is actually kind of ingrained in what is actually called conflict scenes. It is the entirety of when anytime there's a situation where there's tension or some sort of pushback between a different entity and the players, but it can be solved in different means. And there's chase scenes, there's debates, there's all kinds of things that can be utilized in the same order of the conflict scenes. But combat is going to be most likely the most used and also the most expected, because a lot of people build their player characters into combat. So pointing that out, there's other things that I probably in another video go into the larger structure of conflict scenes to help people understand. But at the same time, I just want to start at the bare minimum as always and see how easy it is to just have a conflict scene that is involving combat. So for me personally, the Fabula Ultima combat system is one of my favorite systems in all the games I've played. And I still have a love and respect for some of the more traditional that do the battle map, wargamey style type of gameplay. But I'll be honest with you, I've gotten long burnt out with the long drawn combat scenes that occur, and it gets bogged down with movement and positioning, and it just gets messy, for me at least. But that being said, Fabula Ultima using the rules light system, it's all based off checks of attributes and an exchange that mimics the traditional retro JRPGs of back and forth. Movement isn't exactly a measurement of anything, it's more of just, can your character achieve this? And the larger in life player characters normally have some means of doing it. But we'll go over a little bit more about that in the foundation rules. I just want to make it clear to those who are really into war games, this is not that type of system. But at the same time, though, it doesn't make it any less fun. It can be crunchy for those people that like to make these kind of crunchy style characters, but as long as you start playing with your group, you start realizing what your accomplishments are as a synergy-based team, things can really start going quickly in combat. It doesn't have to be a 3-hour slog like in other games. Now, I will also say this out of my own experience in teaching the game and learning with my players too, because we all started from the ground up. I just read some rules ahead of them. It does take a little bit of time because you have to get out of your thought process of traditional games if you've played past games. And then on top of that, just like any other game, learning the rules takes a little bit of time. But I encourage you to get past that curve and you'll really start to have fun with it. That being said, we're going to move forward into the first part where we talk about initiative. Jumping into combat, all you need to know that there is two sides in the fight. There is the allies, which are represented by your player characters, and then there are the GM-controlled NPCs, monsters, maybe even a villain with some tricks up their sleeves on the other. And you just have to determine who goes first. Well, there are pretty much two ways to achieve this as far as the core rulebook standard, and then there is a newly adopted one within the last year or so that has become very popular with the fans, and I'm for either one of them. I personally enjoy the first one, but a lot of people like to expedite the time frame on combat and use the second, and we'll go over both of those. So when it comes to initiative checks in the core rulebook, essentially it is a specific parametered group check. And I know in past videos I've gone over group checks, but for this situation, I'm going to do a quick highlight over them. A group check is basically where you take the allies group of players, then you establish a leader of that group. That leader is going to roll a pair of attributes against a difficulty level to meet or beat to gain some sort of advantage. In initiative checks, it's the same way, but the leader is going to roll specifically dexterity and insight, which for me, I like to think translates to like properly scouting, be prepared with awareness, and then the physical stature to react. That's the way, at least I like to put that together in my mind. But what they're going to roll in that insight dex is going to be against a difficulty level called an initiative score. And the initiative score is found on the GM's monster stat blocks. In a situation where you have more than one monster, they always take the highest initiative score as the difficulty level. Now, once we've established that's what needs to be rolled, the score can fluctuate, obviously. It could be a little less difficult against some smaller monsters, or it could be much more difficult against maybe a boss. That is where the dependency of the support group of the group check can help give boons and pluses to the leader on their roll. So the way they achieve it in initiative is everyone else in the group rolls Dex Insight against difficulty level 10. If they achieve or meet or beat, a +1 bonus goes to the leader's roll against the initiative score. You can have across the board everyone succeed. I've seen it the other way around where no one is able to achieve anything. But it's also worth noting, and something that is often overlooked, is if you roll a crit or a fumble, it automatically is either the success or failure, but there is no opportunities that are established in a support check. Just because the amount of rolls at a request, there's a higher chance of opportunities being achieved, which can really bend the reality of the game way too quickly, and that is not in the heart of Soul Fabula Ultima. But that being said, let's say 2 of 3 people that are supporting the leader are successfully rolling their difficulty level of 10. That means they get to apply +2 to that leader's roll. But there's one other thing, and I think this is something that is overlooked a lot with people new to Fabula Ultima, is the value of a bond's strength with the leader. It is said specifically in the core rulebook, whoever has the strongest strength of a bond score with the leader, that leader gets a automatic plus of that strength. So let's say someone has a admiration and loyalty to the leader. So that's a strength of 2. That leader automatically gets +2 to their roll, then whatever is added on from the successful rolls in the group check. So it can be very bountiful, and it's worth understanding that you do not apply the strength modifiers of your what you have with your leader to your rolls in the group support check. That is not what happens. Instead, the highest score goes to the leader. I wanted to underline that because there has been some oversights and kind of just misconceptions on how that's supposed to work. So in the second version, it's not really a check, more of a very popular adopted rule. And all it essentially is the player characters, the player group, the allies, get to always act first in initiative unless there is a villain in the scene. And for me, I'm understanding that to be to expedite into combat, which I can see if you have time constraints and the games need to be a little shorter. I can see the desire of doing that. But I think it's really important in the foundation of Fabula Ultima that is trying to really underline the importance of traits and bonds and growing in relationships with your player characters to have the value of the bond apply to the group check of the initiative roll. I think that really takes away some of the value of what bonds can do if you're just expediting it to the allies to act first unless there's a villain. However, I can also see the grand scheme of things of revelations that they're going against a villain and all these other combats they've had in the past where they're used to kind of setting up their old one-trick ponies and synergies and stuff immediately goes out the window when the villain gets to act first, and usually is going to probably do something that's a little debilitating and takes them by surprise. So I'm not trying to diminish the second one by any means. It's just my approach. I desire the core rule book, but you go either way. I guarantee you will have fun in any scenario. And once that is established, whoever is on initiative, then we go into understanding the flow of action. So now that we established who is the victor in the initiative check, whether it's version 1 or version 2, doesn't really matter. We're going to go forward and say the allies were the victors. And in this scenario, I think this will highlight the flow of action being one of the great factors of combat in Fabula Ultima. And I say that verbiage as my own choice of words. You're not going to find it in the core rulebook because I think it really underlines the free-flowing fluidity of this game when it comes to synergy and actions within the player group. And the reason that being is when it comes to whoever's victor in initiative, and like I said, it's going to be the allies here, they get to choose who starts first. And there is no numerical order that has to be followed or valued going forward. So anyone in the group gets to perform the first action. That's it. And that's what really allows synergy to exist, because the players as a team can discuss, how are we going to start this? What do you think we need to do? Do we need to build our defenses? Do we need to debilitate their threats? Do we need to just go free flow damage? There's so many choices, and it's up to the team to decide. And unless someone's really ready to just take the initiative action, it's worth discussing. And a lot of people might say, well, that's really metagamey. Yeah, that's part of Fabula Ultima. They have a whole system of meta currency called Fabula points, where the players get to boon their characters out of the actual reality of the game. So I don't really have a problem with that. I really like that this game promotes new players to be more synergize and perform teamwork. I think that's one of the best things about this game system. Now, once we've established who's going to act first and they achieve their action, this is where the flow starts to continue. So we have one ally that has performed their action. Then we go back to an opponent. Then we go back to a player. And then we go back to an opponent until everyone's performed an action throughout the round. Now, it's worth noting that there are monsters in Fabula Ultima that are elites and champions that get to have multiple actions in that round. They don't get to have actions back to back. Like, they don't get to go, if there's a elite that gets to do 2 actions a round, they don't get to go action, but they do get a second action in the form of the flow of the turn order. So keep that in mind as players continue to start seeing bigger threats. But once that is established and all the actions have been depleted, you go into a second round. Now, this is where the initiative order, I think, is great, because once you are the victor of the initiative check, you're always going to start the turn order in the round. So even if it gets to a point where players are starting to dwindle the numbers down of the opponents to a point where it's a ratio of 4-2, the players are going to start really hammering into them. Even if that means that the player first player gets to act, then the monster, then the player, then the monster, but then that leaves 2 more players in the turn that get to have actions back to back. And once they've established their actions, you start a new turn order where the allies get to act again. So it's really supportive of the players, and it really makes them feel powerful and makes them feel accomplished once they start picking the locks of the challenges of the monsters. So once you see the flow of combat and you start to understand teamwork and working with what your characters can do, you can see where the game can move a lot quicker. But that's not to say the GM is not going to throw their own challenges. But whether that be in a villainous action or in just rank of numbers and certain other scenarios, is yet to be seen. Now, after we've established the turn order, we're going to go into what is considered actions in combat. And to be perfectly honest, it's not just combat, but most of them do focus on combat. So now that we've talked about flow of action and the fluidity of combat going back and forth between allies and opponents, we're going to go over what you can do as actions in the game. And these are the basic actions that everyone can perform no matter what their class archetypes are, whatever. Of course, the classes do other things that support some of these actions, but it's worth noting that people have a tendency to overlook this and forget what values they can perform unless they're just trying to specialize in something. So always consider what actions you have before you go just straight free flowing into blowing your MP pool or whatever to do something else. There might be some tactical value in doing something a little more basic. But as we look over here, we're going to start here with, there is the attack action where you are able to perform a melee range attack. Now, this is worth noting that there are certain monsters that have like flying, or players, but it's usually monsters that only can be reached with ranged attacks or abilities. And that is going to be people that have specialization in range weapons like pistols or bows, crossbows, whatever the case. They're the only ones that can attack these, or using magic. There's also certain magical abilities like Soaring Strike from the Elementalist that allows the melee-based character to soar into the air and strike with a melee attack. But other times there is going to be limitations where you may not be able to hit this monster. But either way, there is the attack action. it will expend your action. If you attack, you can't do anything else unless there's certain parameters from your classes saying otherwise. Then we go into equipment, which says you switch any number, good highlight right here, you switch any number of equipped items with any number of items in your backpack. This action doesn't apply to your armor. So if you need to, if you have another weapon or something and the monster is vulnerable to fire and you're having an ice weapon, and you can switch that out, but it requires an action to do that. So it's worth noting that sometimes you might want to be prepared coming into a fight. If you're going to go fight a fire giant, don't be having, the flame kiss pistol or something like that, where it's going to be a little less effective. Then we have guard, which this is something I have been abusing the hell out of in the Shields Rest collaboration I'm doing with my character, who has gone a lot into Guardian. But what that achieves is, if you're using your action, you can, once per turn, get this highlight again here, see if I'm successful in doing so, until the start of your next turn, which can be a long time, you gain a resistance to all damage. You gain a +2 to oppose checks, so if you have to oppose against someone, and then you may cover another creature and prevent foes from performing melee attacks against them, which is really huge if you are a bulky kind of melee type of creature or a guardian, like I said, and you're worried about your caster support being the interest of the monsters. You can protect them from a melee-based attack, and you're the one who absorbs it. Why does that benefit you? You can be, like I said, a guardian like me who is going like dual shields and really upping their defense. It makes it hard for the monsters to actually hit me. And if they are, I'm at least getting the resistances to minimize damage. It is a tactic that I think is often overlooked and should be utilized more often. Even if you're not a guardian, you should consider that. Then we have hinder, which allows anyone to basically perform a difficulty level 10 check against an enemy. If you succeed, you inflict dazed, shaken, slow, or weak upon them, of any of those choices. Now, of course, what you're trying to say to do to hinder is up to the GM on what two attributes you're going to be using in the actual attack, or excuse me, the difficulty level. But it's worth noting, you can help, even if your MP pool is short and you're worried about the expenditures of it, you can use that turn. Maybe you're a caster that doesn't do a lot of physical damage and that's kind of what's needed. Don't worry about it. Hinder them. Give them something that is going to debilitate them and help your group. It's worth noting, remember, in the conditions, like if you do slow, that removes, I believe that's their dexterity, that drops their physical defense down a bit. That's huge, especially for melee-based characters. So don't underplay your value just because your MP pool might be low. But of course, you can do the next option, which is inventory, and you spend inventory points to produce and immediately use a consumable item. This would be like an elixir or a tonic for hit points or magic points, just to name, or mind points to name a couple. You can cast that on yourself. You can cast it onto another entity. If you are a tinkerer and you have, no, not a tinkerer. I can't remember if it's a tinkerer or sharpshooter. The only reason I'm having conflictions is because my player is a tinkerer / sharpshooter. They have potion rain, where they can throw an item in the air and then split the distribution to two people. So basically, if it was 50 mind points that someone was going to gain, they can split it and give 25 to two entities. It's a really cool ability using the inventory option. Then you have objective, which says you work towards accomplishing an objective within the conflict. This will require an attribute check or a pose check. Complex goals will often require a clock. So there's going to be times in combat where there might be scenarios where you guys are going to have to focus on the objective too. It's not just defeating the villain or the monsters. Let's say there is 5 clock formations of before some hostages fall into a pit or whatever like that in a cage. I'm just throwing out the top of my head. You have to focus some of your action accountability towards that objective if you want to save the people. So that makes it a little more complex of a combat, because it's not just back and forth fisticuffs. Then we have spell. You cast one of the spells you have learned, which are used using magic checks. And all the casters have certain styles of how they use their attributes. I believe, for example, a druid-like character, the Chimerist, they can use might and willpower as their two attributes they use, where a spiritist will use insight, willpower as their casting attributes. Now, this one, study, is, in my opinion, the most underrated, overlooked, and underused action. It is broken AF, in my opinion, but I admire when my players do it, because it says here, you attempt to gain information about someone or something. This will generally require an insight open check. Now, I'm not going to jump further into the study action, maybe at another time, but there is a whole list based on how high you are able to study them, what you learn about that monster. And I've had, now granted, this was combined with my player who has a lore master capability. They rolled like an 18 and they, in a boss fight in my press start, they got to learn pretty much everything about one of the bosses, and that opened up so much capability and synergized opportunity of the group going forward. That combat, while still fun, and there was some unexpected events that still were challenging, they didn't have to worry about their turns basically test realming what was going to work. And that's all because someone performed the study action and rolled really high. So do not underutilize your nerdy characters that really want to learn what is going on with an enemy. Now, it's also worth noting that study can be used in different scenarios, but in the combat sense, that's what it could be used for. Then there's skills, where it says some skills require you to spend an action. I'm not on the top of my head, but there are certain skills that will say this expends an action just so you can't also perform an attack. Then you have other, which this is also why I enjoy Fabula Ultima. They leave open interpretation. It says you perform an action that is not covered by any of the above covered by any of the above, negotiating its resolution and effects with the Game Master. I do love this as open opportunity to discuss what could be done, what could happen, and I really like this because it dispels rules lawyers, and they have their value in certain games, but people that debilitate the succession of fun in a game by being a rules lawyer, I don't have time for. So I love that there's this open-ended amendment to some of these actions. So that being said, that is the rule of actions, and as you continue going in the battle, you can be the victorious entities of the allies, or you can have some downfalls, and that might mean having to surrender. We're going to look at that final end of our discussion of combat. What happens when a player drops to 0? So let's say in combat, the monsters have a few advantageous and unexpected hard-hitting strikes on one particular player character, and that character falls to 0 hit points. Well, in other TTRPGs, they will probably go unconscious. They'll start going to what are called death saving throws or some sort of agency of impending death, which has its own values of agency. But what I love in Fabula Ultima is a totally different approach to how defeat is accomplished in the game. In the circumstance of them being brought to 0 hit points, there's 2 possible options that can be considered. First is what is called surrendering. And what that means is that player character that has fallen to 0 hit points, they are brought out of combat. They are no longer able to help in any shape or form. They cannot have any support of the players one way or the other. Players cannot bring them back with any type of elixirs or magical spells, with an exception of the Spiritist, I believe, has a heroic skill that can do that, but that's a very niche circumstance and a very MP-heavy demand in the circumstance. But in that case, that also means that they cannot be targeted by the monsters of the GM. They cannot be killed. So when you hear that, though, you're probably asking yourself, well, okay, so you're telling me in combat you can't die, and there's no detriment to that. So why would I care about my hit point pool if that means my party is going to possibly be successful really quickly? Well, this is where surrendering comes into play. First off, you are not completely amended or void of detriment. In fact, there's multiple things that GM can invoke on you. And I'm looking over here just on my side notes. There is what's called samples of consequences of surrendering. For example, darkness. You must change your theme to one of the following: anger, doubt, guilt, or vengeance. And that becomes the flowing theme of your character's overall actions. So it may have been a bubbly, support healer class type of character that falls down. The GM invoking this on them, they lose their hope. They lose their one of their more optimistic themes, and they have to take on this role. And I love that changes kind of how the characters to role play their actions and go forth until something changes that element. There's also things like loss, something incredibly precious such as magical artifacts, a loved person, or an ancient and important heirloom is taken from you. There is collaborative narrative, and that's always the key point of Fabula Ultima, that can build a fun idea of their downfall means this. And so it's worth noting that once again, Fabula Ultima being such an adventurous narrative JRPG or TTRPG, that your fall comes with heavy-handed consequences. Now, it's also worth noting, if you do surrender, you gain 2 Fabula points, which is also a boon. But also know that there's a lot of effects in the narrative of the consequences of your fall. Now, there's also another option, which is called sacrifice. This is where the end of life is achieved with the player character. It's not the GM's decision because they deplete into 0. It is put into the narrative succession of the player to say how this player character does something grand to basically turn the tides of a circumstance. And I'm just going to read real quick as far as what that will require, though, too. There are at least 2 things that must be true to surrender. This cannot be just any mimbly-bimbly situation. There must be a villain present on the scene, or your sacrifice would benefit a character you have bonds with, or you believe your sacrifice would make the world a better place. So 2 of those must be in play. You don't have to have a villain, but the other 2 must come into factor. So that is worth noting. You don't get to just one day you want to do something grand because you want to change characters. Of course, you could do that if you wanted to, but that is the caveat. So it's not just breaking a villainous game scene just because you fell to 0. So they have to have those considerations. But if you want to see an awesome example of this, check out my actual play of Press Start, not the first one, the one that I didn't get to complete. There is a second one afterwards that is part 1 and part 2 of the same game. I just had them partitioned out. But you get to see near the end one of the characters from my player, Karafish27 on TikTok. She was using the role, or she was playing the character Levine, who was a Dark Blade. Well, she went to 0 hit points, and I was not expecting this. She turned the tide by deciding she was going to sacrifice herself. And it made this big narrative, impactful event that changed the whole dynamic of how the fight went. They ended up becoming victorious because of her sacrifice. So always think about the grand scheme of what your character's accomplishments are, whether it's in succession of battle or the downfall of your last breath. That is what makes Fabula Ultima so fantastically impactful when it comes to combat. Even if you go, well, that sounds kind of lame that you don't just die. Well, no, you can choose that as a narrative spectrum, and it also protects the value of players who really love their characters. If they want them to continue on in the story because they love them so much, that's there. But at the same time, if someone wants to leave in a big cinematic exit to bring in a new character, that's there too. And I absolutely love that it's not in the vein of the GM targeting them and taking them out of the game, because there's some toxic GMs that will do that. And I love Fabula Ultima because it basically takes that factor out. So now that you've seen what the consequences are of falling to 0 hit points, we've talked about initiative, and we've shown the action flow of battles with an exception of what classes can do, I think we're going to wrap this up, and I'm going to see you at the end of the video. So we've come to the end of a video that has been long overdue. And once again, final apologies for it taking so long. I had to overcome some hurdles, as I discussed about in my intro, and get back on my feet because I love making these videos and I want Fabula Ultima to be as intuitive as the core rulebook shows to be. But I also know there's a lot of people that don't want to just dive in and start reading something new. It is my mission statement and my goal to show you this game can be fun and easy and motivate you to read the core rulebook, because ultimately it's as simple as I'm making it. It just takes time to invest in. And with combat, once you understand the rules and the players understand what they can do to help each other, it can be very free flowing and fast. You're not bogged down by position. You're not bogged down by heights and distances and movement like in other TTRPGs. It's a very quick back and forth. Now, that's not to say it can't get crunchy, because as you will see in my 5 to 50 experiences with the Shields Reds group, we start getting a little complex with what our characters can do, and it does bog a little bit of stuff down at times, but overall it's fun, and we still are accomplishing a combat within about an hour and a half in most cases. So that being said, just be educated in what can happen. Know what is going to be the experiences, whether you fall to 0 hit points, surrendering, sacrificing, or just understanding the boons of you being ahead in the initiative. There's a lot of great things in the combat of Fabula Ultimate that makes this game very free-flowing and fast and fun. Now, I want to also preface, because I went over experience and leveling not too long ago in a video, and there is a particular advancement rule that is called Blitz that is based around combat. So or in the end of a combat scene. So if you want to ever include that, go back to my XP and leveling video and it'll go over it. It creates a little more oomph to the combat, meaning things and what is achieved. But once again, it's an advancement rule that is your choice. You can make the combat a little more complex if you want to, or you can dumb it down. What matters is you guys are having fun, you're working together, and you don't feel targeted from an outside source of the GM being toxic or the players being problematic. Always discuss what your achievements are as a group. So with that being said, it has been a long time for me to say, I hope you have had a good day. I hope you have a great night. And I hope you find some time to play Fabula Ultima. I can't wait to see you guys on the next video. I'll see you later.